Good morning and thanks for being with us. The UK is bolstering its military presence in Europe, sending thousands of troops along with dozens of tanks and heavy artillery pieces in what's described as one of the largest deployments since the Cold War. The British Army personnel will join tens of thousands of NATO troops for joint exercises across the continent aimed at deterring Russian aggression. Meanwhile, Moscow has continued to launch missile strikes all across Ukraine. Well, Ukrainian authorities have accused Russia of firing two cruise missiles on Kiev while the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was visiting. At least 10 people were injured. Well, concerns are being raised about the safety of two more British nationals in Ukraine a day after it was confirmed that a British soldier called Scott Sibley had been killed in the country while fighting for the Ukrainians. The Presidium network says that two men working as humanitarian relief volunteers were captured on Monday by Russian forces at a checkpoint in the southeast of the country. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has thanked US President Joe Biden for his request for $33 billion in new funding to help support Ukraine, saying that he hopes Congress would quickly approve the measure.
President Biden
rightly said today that this step is not cheap. The negative consequences for the whole world from Russia's aggression against Ukraine and against democracy are so massive that by comparison the US support is necessary. Together we can definitely stop the Russian aggression and reliably defend Europe.
Well, meanwhile, new pictures have emerged from the besieged city of Mariupol, reportedly showing the aftermath of a Russian attack on a military field hospital in the Azovstal steel plant. Now, the video was released by the Azov battalion and it shows injured people being treated and soldiers digging through the rubble. The Ukrainian president's office said an operation is planned to evacuate civilians from that plant today. Well, let's bring in Alex Ross, who's joining us now from Dnipro in the very centre of Ukraine. Alex, good morning to you. So let's first pick up on the news that we've had come into us this morning. There's two British humanitarian workers who are missing. What more do we know?
Good morning. Yeah, this is an extremely worrying development, not least of all for the families of these people. We don't have a huge amount of information at the moment. We know that they were working on humanitarian aid projects. It's believed that they were captured by Russian forces somewhere in the southeast of the country. Now, the Foreign Office is working to try to get more details at the moment and try to obviously get their release. But this does, of course, present an extremely difficult problem for the UK government at the moment. But as I was saying, details are extremely scant at the moment. But I suppose as well it underlines really the wider dangers that many people are now facing in this conflict. There isn't a scrap of Ukraine that isn't at threat from Russian aggression. It doesn't matter whether you are in an apartment building in Odessa feeding your 3-month-old baby or whether you're dug in a trench in the Donbass. You are I suppose, at threat from Russian Grads, rockets and cruise missiles. Again, that was underlined in downtown Kiev overnight. Very large explosions there, and the timing of that, of course, is something that perhaps we need to just pause a little bit and think about this morning. At the time, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, was being given a tour of the northern districts, places where Russian war crimes are alleged to have taken place. Now, President Zelensky and many, many other people across this country think that this was really a signal by the Russians mocking the United Nations as an institution and also, to a certain extent, the world. I think the other thing as well to reflect on in terms of what that means is just how failed the diplomacy is, the peace negotiations to try and stop the fighting. I think that's why we're now hearing, whether it's from London, whether it's from Berlin, whether it's from Washington, words really that reflect that we are going to see most likely this war continue for many, many more months, if not years.
OK, Alex Rossi in Dnipro, thank you very much for that. All right. And I'm joined now by the International Trade Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Let's just pick up on what we heard from Alex there. Another two Brits missing. We had one die yesterday and one is still missing. What's being done to get these people back?
So the Foreign Office obviously is working very closely with those in Ukraine, both to make sure that the identification is correct, and indeed to work with local authorities and to support families here. As we've set out right from the beginning, we don't want British nationals to go and fight, but there are many, many ways in which so many people, and I think the heartfelt, genuinely heartfelt anxiety and appalledness that Putin has illegally invaded and is now continuing to bombard those areas where he had stepped away is something that quite rightly horrifies the British public. And there are many ways that we can all support through humanitarian, through opening our homes, through supporting through the financial channels. But we don't want people to go and fight. But obviously the Foreign Office is doing all it can to support and identify these two people.
I mean, we're saying that now we don't want people to go and fight. That's not quite what the Foreign Secretary said at the beginning of this war, is it? She said that she would support those who wanted to go and fight for what she saw as a just cause in Ukraine. She was wrong to say that, wasn't she, at the time?
So she continued to explain after that we do not want British nationals to go. At the time, obviously, the advice was to not go to Ukraine. Well, that remains the travel advice for obvious reasons, because it's a war zone. And we want to make sure that people can show their support, their solidarity for Ukrainians and for the battle that those extraordinary people are doing to fight for the freedom of their country through all those other ways. And it is extraordinary how generous the British people are being, both with their own homes, with their money, with their time to support the Ukrainian families.
And just a thought then on that British support for Ukrainians coming here, that scheme is still not working as well as it should, is it, at the moment? There are still massive problems and bureaucracy in Ukrainians arriving.
So the process has been slow, and Lord Harrington is working literally day in, day out, night and day with his team to make it flow. I think we've had nearly 75,000 visas now granted. I've had 2 families arrive last weekend into my constituency who've been welcomed. It's been so touching, welcomed by the whole community, I mean, in a sense of warmth and affection, and there are more from their own community who will be coming. But we want to make sure that all those who are coming will be going to a safe place. So local councils have been asked to obviously go and check the homes that have been offered. And we don't want anyone to be found in a difficult environment where they might be put under any kind of stresses. So we want to make sure that it's rigorous and that visa system is working. It has been cumbersome, but Lord Harrington is absolutely focused on it. And anyone who is watching, who is keen to be generous with their home, please do be in touch with your MP if you feel that the process is getting stuck somewhere.
I mean, cumbersome is one way to put it. Is this a problem with civil servants not being in the office?
No, this is a process because it was set out, as I say, whilst we are, one of the most generous countries in wanting to welcome people in, and the Home Secretary has set this out a number of times. We want to make sure that we are both bringing people who will be very traumatised and very vulnerable into safe places. So the councils have been asked to do a number of checks to make sure that the homes are indeed ones where they can be safe, and also making sure that these refugee routes are not going to be abused by those who wish to come into the UK and do our citizens harm.
Absolutely right. Well, look, let's leave Ukraine there for a moment. We must talk about what's happening in Westminster at the moment. Your colleague, Suella Braverman, described a minority of your colleagues as animals for the way they behave in Parliament. Do you agree?
So I think all of us as women in Parliament have been subjected to inappropriate language, to wandering hands. It's how my granny used to call it. It doesn't change. The vast majority of the men I work with are delightful. They're committed parliamentarians. They're passionate about the causes they fight. But there are a few for whom too much drink, or indeed a sort of, a view that somehow being elected makes them, God's gift to women, that they can suddenly please themselves. That is never okay. That kind of behaviour, disrespect for women, and indeed some of the, the younger women who are not parliamentarians, who are part of our, parliamentary family, that is never okay. It's never okay anywhere. It's not okay in Westminster either. And, we have had a number of, ways to help women now share their anxiety, the experiences they've had, following on from the Me Too campaign a few years ago. We have now started to make frameworks that ensure that women can speak up, but it's still, I think, not as good as it can be. Fundamentally, if you're a bloke, keep your hands in your pockets and behave as you would if you had your daughter in the room.
You'd hope that they would, but, you set up that scheme 5 years ago, after Me Too. It's not doing what it should be doing, is it? This is still happening.
So, no, it is doing that people can refer and indeed...
Yeah, but it's not deterring the men from behaving in the way that they have.
There is an interesting question, is what is the relevant deterrent that would ensure that minority, and it is a minority of men who think it's OK to behave inappropriately, would feel the pain. And
losing the whip?
Well, you know, a number of times that has been used, and I see that Liam Byrne was... formally chastised this week for bullying, another entirely inappropriate way of behaving in the workplace or anywhere. I mean, these are just, ways of behaving that are not acceptable. And those of us who have, public roles of responsibility, and we are indeed, should be demonstrating what good behaviour and leadership looks like, need to make sure that we are all doing that. So I am very firm. I'm very comfortable calling out anybody who thinks that their wandering hands are OK, and I have done it a number of times over the years. So people doing that to me, and I will always encourage women to feel empowered to say so publicly. But that's difficult for those who are younger and where that power difference is very real. So we continue to champion them.
I absolutely. I hope there is a place for them to come forward, and I hope they feel confident that they can do that. But what is more than wandering hands is this is a guy who perhaps was watching porn more than once in the House of Commons. I mean, that is disgraceful behaviour. He should be sacked.
Well, I mean, it's just completely unacceptable to be, well, A, why has he got the time? B, why does he think that's OK? What you do in the privacy of your own home as an adult is a different issue.
So why has he still got the whip? And why don't
I haven't had a chance, actually, to speak to colleagues. I've been out and about. But I think the issue is there, and the grievances committee system is now in place. And I know that the Speaker is very focused on getting to this issue, and I haven't been able to talk to anyone this week to do it, but it is completely unacceptable.
Marie-Trell, you know that the Chief Whip knows this person's name. I'm sure that people, senior members in the party, know who he is. He was reported by 2 of your colleagues. He's still got the whip. We don't know who he is. Why is that happening? Why is the party being so slow to take action against this person who was watching pornography in the House of Commons? So,
as I say, I haven't had a chance to talk to the Chief Whip, and I know that we are the ladies in question who apparently saw this completely inappropriate activity have been encouraged to use the formal system in the House of Commons to be able to report it, and I hope very much that they will, or indeed have, I don't know, and that the system will demonstrate, if that was the case, exactly what the punishment should be for that sort of inappropriate behaviour. I
mean, you said you haven't spoken to people about this, and that's perfectly fine, but is your party doing enough, do you think? Should more be done?
I'm very, very confident the Chief Whip, I'm a great fan of Chris Heaton-Harris's, will follow both working with Parliament and parliamentary processes to make sure that that is both robust and provides the support to the women in question, and that he will take a decision that is appropriate when it's right to do so. I mean,
you mentioned the behaviour at the beginning, you mentioned this idea of wandering hands. It's much more than that, it's much more serious in many instances, let's be clear about that. But you also mentioned the drink culture, boozing at Westminster. Now, people watching this will be amazed that parliamentarians can go and have a drink and then perhaps go back to work, go and have a debate, speak with other colleagues. Do you think it's time to ban alcohol in the House of Commons? Because it seems to be a real problem in enabling people to behave in terrible ways.
So again, for most people, that isn't the case. We do have, when we have long sittings, when a Monday, in my world, starts at 8 a.m. with meetings, and if we're not voting till 10, it's a long day. So I will, I am fed by the House of Commons several times during the day. We have canteens we can go to, and in the evening, if there is a pause, there's nothing wrong with, having a drink with your colleagues, a chance to catch up and discuss, matters of the day. It's those who, abuse and find the drinking culture too strong. That is not OK, and that's something that has improved a great deal. When you talk to those who've been in Parliament for much longer than the vast majority have, the culture was a much heavier drinking culture than it was. But that sense of responsible drinking, which we advocate, and I would advocate to my kids and to anyone else, is something that we want to see throughout the place. And that's what we need to work on 100%. At every level.
And responsible drinking is one thing, but, we don't allow people to drink and drive, because most of us won't drink and drive, but some people do, so that's why we ban it. Now, people in Parliament are drinking and behaving badly. Shouldn't we ban booze in Parliament?
People can go round to the Red Lion up the road and go for have a drink if they're waiting.
But that's not quite the same, is it? It's on-site, isn't it? And it's probably heavily subsidised as well.
Not particularly, no. But actually, the reality is that there's nothing wrong, I think, in the course of an evening or at the end of a working day. We may vote at 7 on a Tuesday, for instance. At the end of the working day, you might go round the corner to a pub with your mates after work, as indeed, many people do from the office.
But then you're going home. You're not going back to work where this stuff is.
So there is the challenge that it is with Parliament, is that we are in this very unusual location. The key message, and I would say to colleagues, and I have many times said to people, is, there's nothing wrong with having, a drink with colleagues, a chance to discuss issues. Responsible drinking has to be the way forwards, and we continue to try and improve that.
Absolutely. OK, International Trade Secretary, a deal has been signed with Switzerland. We're able to do that deal, but we still can't get Brexit done. What's going on there?
So we have, obviously, our trade and cooperation agreement with the EU, and that is all signed and sealed, and we continue now to work in the new environment, which is the UK as an independent trading nation. And we're also now able to build those trade deals as a result of being out of the EU with nations across the world. So we're working on a trade deal with India, which will be a huge opportunity for British businesses, with the CPTPP, which is a great Indo-Pacific group of market of £8 billion. We've just signed a deal with Australia and with New Zealand, and a digital economy agreement with Singapore, a really exciting part. The UK is leading the world in helping business to go digital, which strips away cost both for the business but also for the consumer. So we're working across the world now, a freedom that's been given to us since Brexit, to be able to really provide as many tools as businesses need and are asking us for, so that we can get much better opportunities for our consumers.
I mean, that's all great, but we still can't sort out the border arrangements for Northern Ireland. Why is that taking so long, and why have we decided now to push it off until the end of next year?
So as the Brexit Opportunities Minister set out, we want to make sure that those inward flows coming into the UK continue to be smooth. The discussions continue. They're led by the FCDO on how to try and ensure that those trade diversion issues that we've seen in Northern Ireland...
Is it a cost issue?
For
consumers,
I mean. It's a flows issue. So what the idea of opening borders and ensuring that trade flow is that trade is there. So Northern Ireland businesses have been seeing trade diversion. It's a concern that they have. So the FCDO continues to have discussions with the EU to find the right ways to try and reduce those problems and to make sure that trade can flow as well as it can.
Because it could make things more expensive for consumers, the situation that's there on the border.
So we want to continue to make sure that we both have those flows that are unencumbered and that it works really well for businesses, and, of course, at the end of the line is the consumer. So more friction can bring more costs. So we continue to work with the EU to find the best solutions for that.
OK, I think we finally got there at the end. It may be a bit more expensive, but we're not saying that Brexit's going to make things more expensive, of course. Anne-Marie Trevelyan, International Secretary of State for Trade, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, let's take a look now at the morning's newspapers. And, of course, Ukraine is making many of the front pages. Let's start with the front page of the Metro, which features the British man Scott Sibley, who has been killed in Ukraine. The Financial Times leads on Joe Biden's plea to the US Congress to approve $33 billion in extra aid for Ukraine. The US President's plans to increase aid to Ukraine also feature on the front page of The Guardian. Well, The Telegraph features the news that Britain is going to send 8,000 troops to Eastern Europe. That's, of course, as we've been saying, one of the largest deployments since the Cold War. I'll have more of those papers later, and we'll get the reaction later from a former Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations, that's Lord Mark Malloch Brown, to that news that two missiles have hit Kiev, while the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was visiting. And we're going to hear from a doctor about why so many GPs are losing staff and why some in general practice are even taking their own lives. They'll tell us what needs to be done to prevent it. Well, Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, will be with us just after 8. Now, the Premier of the British Virgin Islands has been arrested in the US city of Miami on charges related to drug trafficking and money laundering. Let's bring in now Aisha Zahid, who's joining us from outside the Foreign Office. So, Aisha, good morning to you. What do we know about this case right now?
Well, he was detained in Miami yesterday as part of an operation being run by the US Drug Enforcement Administration. And in fact, local media are reporting that DEA agents posed as cocaine traffickers as part of one of Mexico's biggest drug cartels to help make this arrest. And we have had reaction from the government. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has put out a statement in which she has said, "I'm appalled by these serious allegations. This arrest demonstrates the importance of the recently concluded Commission of Inquiry. I've spoken to the Governor of the British Virgin Islands and he will be holding an emergency meeting of the territory's cabinet later today. He will set out next steps tomorrow, including urgent publication of the inquiry's report." Now, that inquiry was launched last summer to look into long-standing allegations of corruption and misgovernance. And on top of that, now Andrew Fahie facing charges of drug trafficking and money laundering.
OK, Aisha, for now, thank you for that reporting. Now, the President of Guyana has told Sky News that an apology is needed for the role that the United Kingdom played in the transatlantic slave trade. It comes as the Earl and Countess of Wessex complete their tour of the Caribbean. President Irfan Ali has been speaking to Sky's Shaman Freeman-Powell.
A royal tour intended to promote the Platinum Jubilee. But for some, it served as a reminder of a painful colonial past. And as far as the President of Guyana is concerned, it's time to say sorry.
I think an apology is needed. This was one of the greatest atrocities in human history. And those who suffered in this atrocity are persons from the region, a lot of persons from the Caribbean region. And that suffering was not only immense, it was generational. And a lot of wealth was derived from the suffering, a lot of benefits was derived from the suffering.
The slave trade was once backed by both Parliament and the royal family until it was abolished in the 1830s. What was once the Empire became the Commonwealth. And just last month, its future king addressed the sins of his family's past, but was criticised for falling short of an apology.
I want to express my profound sorrow. Slavery was abhorrent, and it should never have happened.
The royal tours were intended to strengthen the links between the UK and the Caribbean, but it seems they may have weakened them, with many announcing plans to become a republic before calling for compensation. Guyana made this move in the 70s and says sometimes a reset is needed.
It is not cutting links, it is renewing yourself on this new path that understands the history, but are saying now, listen, we are on our own path, and in this path we are equals, and we are going to strengthen our relationship with you, but this is the way we're going to advance.
The royals and the Brits in general are still highly regarded across the Caribbean, but it's clear that there is a momentum for real change, and the Caribbean are no longer asking for it. It's being demanded. Shaman Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
OK, let's take a look at some of today's other headlines. And the three-time Wimbledon champion, Boris Becker, could be sent to jail today when he's sentenced later for flouting terms of his 2017 bankruptcy. The former world #1 was found guilty of transferring hundreds of thousands of pounds from his business account and failing to declare the number of properties that he owns. The messaging app WhatsApp has confirmed that it's running as usual after more than 40,000 people in the UK reported issues with it. The issues began at around 9 p.m. last night. Most of the problems were reported in London, Manchester and Birmingham. A report has found exclusions from primary schools should be banned within the next 4 years. The report from the former Children's Commissioner says that the current system is not working for every child and has left at-risk children being viewed as a problem.
Black children are 3 times as likely to be excluded as their white peers, particularly black boys. And this can be very young as well. I've spoken to parents over the last few months whose children have been excluded from primary school. One mother talked about her child. He was excluded 17 times between Easter and December.
People with arthritis are being urged to lose weight and exercise as the main therapies for their condition. New guidance from the NHS and from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence says that people who are overweight should be told their pain can be reduced if they lose weight. Well, the government is promising support with the cost of electricity and high energy usage businesses such as steel and paper manufacturing. Ministers said that an energy-intensive industry compensation scheme will be extended for a further 3 years and its budget will be doubled. The scheme has provided more than £2 billion in support to businesses since 2013. Now, ministers say lessons learned from supplying millions of COVID vaccines in the UK will help tackle a shortage in hormone replacement therapy. It's feared low stocks of HRT is causing some women to feel suicidal as they deal with the extreme symptoms of the menopause. The Health Secretary has appointed Madeleine McTiernan, Director General of the Vaccine Task Force, to help. There have been calls for cultural change in Westminster amid claims of bullying, sexism and of one MP accused of watching pornography while in the House of Commons. Now, this morning, the International Trade Secretary told this programme that many women in Westminster have been exposed to inappropriate language and even wandering hands.
So I think all of us as women in Parliament have been subjected to inappropriate language, to, wandering hands. It's how my granny used to call it. It doesn't change. The vast majority of the men I work with are delightful. They're, committed parliamentarians. They're passionate about the causes they fight. But there are a few for whom, too much drink, or indeed a sort of, a view that somehow being elected makes them, God's gift to women, that they can suddenly please themselves. That is never okay. That kind of behaviour, disrespect for women, and indeed some of the the younger women who are not parliamentarians, who are part of our, parliamentary family, that is never okay. It's never okay anywhere. It's not okay in Westminster either.
Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell joins me now. Rob, good morning to you. So Anne-Marie Trevelyan there saying that none of this is okay, but also saying that she doesn't quite know where this investigation is at.
Yeah, it was a pretty bleak picture, I thought, that she was painting, saying that she'd had to call out a number of men over the years for what she said was wandering hands. I think what makes it more depressing, as you pointed out to her, is that this is not new stuff. 5 years ago, we went through the so-called Post-Brexit scandal, where change was promised, a new grievance scheme was set up. That is what Anne-Marie Trevelyan was referring to when she talked about the ways that people can raise complaints. But I think the fact that this is still happening, for a start, calls into question whether that is working. And also, if we look at the case we've been looking at, considering this week over the MP accused of watching pornography in the House of Commons, well, we don't even know whether an investigation has started yet because, of course, witnesses need to go to this scheme to start the investigation. As Anne-Marie Trevelyan said, she doesn't know whether that has happened yet. Also this morning, there's accusations, complaints over the way this scheme has handled a separate case of Liam Byrne, who was, of course, suspended from the House for a couple of days over bullying allegations, and how that was handled by the scheme as well. So I think big questions for how the scheme operates. Complaints can take months, if not sometimes years, to investigate. All the while you've got someone still a member of the Conservative Party, still working in Westminster, accused of these various very serious accusations.
Yeah, and perhaps nothing being done just yet. All right, Rob, thank you very much for that for now. Now, let's take you to China, where authorities there are continuing to impose strict COVID restrictions in an attempt to prevent an outbreak of COVID-19 from spreading. Now, all schools are closing in Beijing in a further tightening of the measures there as mass testing continues all across the capital. Let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire, who's joining me now live from Beijing. Tom, good to have you with us. So, look, what's going on in Beijing? Last time you and I spoke, it was all about Shanghai. Now it's come to Beijing.
Yeah, it feels like Beijing is hanging in the balance. Sunday night, they ordered the mass testing of everyone in this district, Chaoyang. That was 3.5 million people. That was extended to around 20 million people across Beijing, doing 3 tests this week. So they're trying to map the spread of COVID-19. What they've been doing so far is increasing these restrictions, as you say. Schools are now closing, more gyms are closing, live entertainment venues ordered to shut their doors, and also people asked to work from home where possible. What they're doing instead of the full lockdown is what's happening behind me here. This is a compound that has had a case and it's been sealed off. There are supplies coming in, but no one's allowed out. They're only allowed in the front bit of it. And that's what Beijing's hoping to do. These sort of places are dotted all across this district of Chaoyang, Beijing's biggest district. So rather than the whole city going into lockdown, they're trying to persevere with this. There are around 50 cases being added a day, and I think authorities are probably happy with this approach if it stays at that number. That's testing 20 million people, only around 50 cases in Beijing. And as you say, they are trying to avoid that Shanghai lockdown. That is going into its 6th week of very, very strict lockdown. There are signs it may be easing. Case numbers have been coming down. They're around 15,000 over the last 24 hours, still very high by Chinese standards, but some districts being let out of that very strict lockdown. They can leave their neighbourhoods, apartments, and they can wander around their streets. There's not much to do because everything is shut in terms of restaurants and businesses, but there is a little sign of hope that they are near the end of that ordeal. Beijing, the worry here is that we're really at the beginning.
OK, Tom, in Beijing for now. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's return now to our top story, Ukraine and the Russian invasion. Now, authorities have accused Russia of launching 2 missiles into Kiev while the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, was visiting the capital. I'm pleased to say I'm joined now by the former Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations. That's Lord Mark Malloch Brown, who's joining us live. Lord Brown, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and good morning to you. I mean, reports that these missiles have hit Kiev while Antonio Guterres was there. What does that tell us about Russia's respect or lack thereof for the United Nations?
Well, it tells us there isn't much. It follows on the Secretary-General making a difficult visit to Moscow earlier in the week, where, he was given a fairly chilly reception and spoke up strongly against what had happened in Ukraine. But there is a pattern to this. Putin loves to probe the psychological weak points of his diplomatic opponents. Angela Merkel famously, when she visited him, found that he sort of unleashed a large dog on her, knowing her dislike and fear of dogs. I think this falls into the same category. In his first term as Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres visited Libya and was absolutely, frankly, somewhat daunted when Tripoli was bombed during that visit. And it made him a much more cautious diplomat, according to those around him, for the rest of his first term. He finally kind of gets his courage back, goes to Kiev and to Moscow, and hey presto, Putin reminds him of that sort of psychological flaw, if you like, of the first term. And maybe not psychological flaw, because a Secretary-General should be able to expect to visit during a conflict and have the competence not be shooting rockets around him. So it is humiliating in a way. And I think the international community, not just Europe, but countries everywhere, will recognise they cannot have their UN Secretary-General sort of treated in this disrespectful, casual, and frankly dangerous way by Putin and the Russian regime.
Absolutely, but I mean, humiliating is one way to put it. Doesn't it reveal as well, Lord Malloch Brown, the impotence of the United Nations to have any effect, despite the fact that Antonio Guterres has been to Moscow and Kiev this past week?
Well, look, I don't think the United Nations, and it's following on the backs of Turkey, of President Macron of France, of Germany and others who've tried to secure a process towards a ceasefire. This is not a conflict, tragically, which is ready for peacemaking by anybody, let alone the United Nations. Neither side is ready to make the concessions that would require. So he very much focused his non-public, private efforts on securing humanitarian corridors, particularly trying to find a way to get the civilians trapped under the plant in Mariupol, the large steel plant, a safe passage out. And, in theory, Putin agreed to that, but there's been no sign on the ground that even that very limited humanitarian goal has been advanced. So this remains a situation where the Russian word is not to be trusted, and where the conflict is going to go on. And of course, frankly, for the UN, this is a pretty fundamental moment. A lot of ambassadors, a lot of UN staff, in an open letter to the Secretary-General, described this as the UN's League of Nations moment, the moment at the beginning, just before the Second World War, when that international mechanism for peacekeeping, the UN's predecessor, was basically broken by conflicts in Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and in Spain. And, there are many who worry that the UN faces a similar moment of a sort of crisis of legitimacy and confidence. And, but crises are sometimes moments of opportunity. And I hope member states will use this moment to sort of refashion the UN for today's age, where you have, one of the original guarantors of the UN, the former Soviet Union, now Russia, but has become a rogue state, a enemy of the international law and order system, and where the UN has to rise to the occasion of dealing with that.
Yeah, and Lord Mallet-Brown, then, just a thought then this morning about those Britons who are missing, 1 dead, 3 missing in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, what, as a very senior diplomat yourself, sir, what will be being done right now, and what can be done on the ground in a war zone to try and make sure that those guys can be returned home?
Well, I'm sure every effort will be made to get some kind of limited prisoner swap, and I'm sure British diplomats are active on it. I think also it has to be said that when people choose to go and, fight like this, heroic and important though it is, they are taking real risks, and it's not going to be easy, I suspect, at this moment to necessarily get them out. We're going to see a lot more of this. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This is in all probability, as Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and others have said, going to be a long-run conflict. This is going to be a shadow over Europe for a very long period to come, and it's not going to stop at the borders of Ukraine. We're going to see, steadying inclusion of neighbouring countries at least being destabilised, if not actually be militarily invaded. And so, we're going to have to brace ourselves for a lot more moments like this.
I mean, where does this... Sorry, Lord Mallet-Brown, where does this end then? I mean, look, you've given us your opinion there that you think this is going to be a long conflict. To completely respect that opinion, but where do you think this ends?
Well, I now run an organisation, the Open Society Foundations, and we have huge investments in Ukraine around democracy and free media and human rights, etc. And, people like us are going to go on investing in that agenda to make sure that the threat that Ukraine really posed to Russia, which was never a NATO military threat. It was always one about values and freedom and democracy, which was a challenge to this dire regime next door, the Russian one. We've got to keep that alive. And we've really got to get this to a point where perhaps not Putin personally, but those around him recognize this is a lost conflict and it is time to settle. And, that settlement may not be a complete victory for Ukraine, because peace settlements rarely are unless they follow a complete defeat of one side by the other. But we've got to get to a point where serious diplomacy can be allowed to fill the space and start making real proposals for getting to peace. And at this point, Putin really only contemplates, a total victory, at least in the east and south, and a Ukrainian surrender, and that's not on the cards. But equally, the Ukrainians need to recognize that they're going to have to provide assurances to Russia that they're not going to become a front base for military action or otherwise against Russia. So, and I think they're willing to do that. So I think, in time, we can get to the basis for an agreement. But, equally, we've got to look in the wider geopolitical context. We've got to understand that this is one front in a much more threatening potential repartitioning of the world between a sort of China-Russia bloc and a Western bloc. And I think our real determination in diplomacy has to be to try to prevent that. We had created a world of a single global community, able to deal with common problems, whether it was climate change or development or peace and security. We shouldn't let that world escape us because of the behaviors of ambitious nationalist political leaders in certain countries. We need to fight for a shared world for all of us, a multilaterally governed world. And, that's the real fight. Russia is a little bit of a sideshow, an economy in decline, but one with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, okay.
So we need to fix this conflict, but as a prelude to fixing the wider global deterioration of governance and international diplomacy that's occurred.
Okay, Lord Mark Mallet-Brown, really appreciate your expertise this morning, sir. Thank you so much for being with us. Good day.
Thank you.
There is a dangerous shortage of family practitioners in the UK, as a shocking new poll has found that 1 in 4 GPs say they know a colleague who's taken their own life. The Rebuild General Practice campaign is calling for governments to deliver on a pledge of 6,000 new doctors to try and ease pressure. Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined now by Dr Rachel Ward, who is a GP in Oxfordshire and who is part of the campaign. Dr Ward, thank you so much for being with us and good morning to you. So just tell us some more about this campaign to try and help GPs.
Good morning. Well, yes, we know that the government made a pledge in their manifesto to provide 6,000 additional GPs because we know that we are severely lacking in Great Britain. But unfortunately, they have not met this promise. They've admitted that they are not on track to meet this promise. But the problem that we see is that there is no other plan in place. They haven't identified how they're going to meet the workforce problem or what else they're going to do about it. So we know that we have significant problems in general practice at the moment. The demand is very high. We are losing GPs all the time. And so this is having an outcome of poorer patient care and issues with patient safety. So we really are raising the alarm bell here to ask the government to recognise this issue and come together with us to form a plan going forward.
Thank you for that, Dr Wood. But I wonder, where are we going to find these extra doctors? Are we going to go from universities? Are we going to recruit from overseas? Where are they going to come from?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, this is not going to be resolved overnight. There are several things going on here. So we do need to make general practice a more attractive specialty for people to come into when they are training in medicine. At the moment, it isn't seen as an attractive specialty because of all the negative rhetoric about general practice. But also, very importantly, we are losing very experienced doctors all the time because of the immense workload, because of burnout and stress. So that also needs to be addressed. We also need to stop losing our GPs to keep those workforce numbers up. But you're absolutely right. This is a complex issue that's going to take some sorting out. But the first step is recognising that that needs to be addressed.
I mean, Dr Ward, just lay out for us then why you think general practice is so looked down upon. I've always thought if I was going to be a doctor, apart from being like a high-flying surgeon, being a GP would be quite good.
Well, I think, over the last few years, it's very well known that we are short of GPs in Britain. So we know that the workloads have been increasing all of the time. And then sadly, over the last couple of years, we've seen a huge amount of negative press about general practice. And a recent survey showed that actually patient satisfaction with general practice and also the NHS is at an all-time low, incredibly, after the last couple of years. So I think people see it as a specialty which is really up against it and may choose to go somewhere else.
And of course, that will mean then that the people in communities are perhaps missing out on that first point of contact with a GP, with an expert.
Absolutely. So we know that patients are waiting longer for appointments, having real difficulty getting appointments even. And when we see patients, we have less time with each of them because of the huge numbers of people that we're seeing each day. On average in England, a GP is doing 46 appointments per day, whereas the recommended number is 25. So of course, that's going to dilute the attention and time that each patient gets. All in all, this is having a negative impact on the quality of care that we're able to deliver, unfortunately.